And it's that in order for a species to survive, it needs to consume another. That is the way of life. That is the cycle of life. We are being consumed. And when we pass, hopefully, we will fertilize and feed the earth in order to produce other food and other animals, etc. And I just found that really reassuring, that notion of ensoulment, that we are all ensouled.
Welcome to the Passing Through podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. Hello and welcome. This week I'm passing through Lasky, Poland, and I'm pleased to welcome Eimear Burke back to the Passing Through podcast. But before I do, I wanted to make a brief announcement. My partner Asha and I had been helping collect signatures as a part of a petition to grant the Odra River here in Poland personhood. Tons of people all over Poland were collecting signatures, and after collecting nearly 100,000 signatures, the river will now have legal protections as though it were a person. And to my knowledge, it's the first of its kind in Europe and a step in the right direction in terms of recognizing the earth as having non-human personhood. You'll hear Eimear and I briefly talk about that toward the end of the podcast. Longtime listeners will know Eimear. They will remember her as not just a lovely and articulate druid, but also the chosen chief of OBOD, the order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. She's also a seanchaí, which is a traditional Irish storyteller, and it was a delight to speak with her. And I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Some of the things we talk about are Beltane, pre-Christian pagan history in Ireland, St. Patrick, the power of and need for storytelling and myth, animism, how to enter into dialogue with a forest, the importance of intentionality, bees, and being in service. You can find out more about Eimear at kilkennydruidry.com or druidry.org, where you can find lots of info about druidry and druidic practice. So if you're interested, go check out the show notes. All of that stuff will be there. And otherwise, let's just jump right in. As always, be good to one another and enjoy the show. Okay, Eimear, welcome back to the Passing Through podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on again for the second time. It's great to see you. Welcome back.
I'm delighted to be back. Thank you, Danny. Lovely to be here.
Before we started recording, we were chatting a little bit about the last time we spoke and druidry in general and druidic practice as a nature-based spiritual path. So I'd like to start us off by rooting down and connecting to nature a little bit. The way I'd like to do that is to talk about these certain events that happen inside of druidry. These are time-based events, celestial events. They happen around the solstice or the equinox, for example, but there are also seasonal events. Mm-hmm. The most recent, I guess, being Beltane. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that kind of stuff and about the significance of it and maybe your recent experience during Beltane.
Yeah, so Beltane is the Irish word for the month of May, as well as the festival, on the wheel of the year. And as Druids, it's very important that our inner world is in sync with the outer world. And Beltane is, in the landscape, is a really, really busy time. Everything in nature explodes. And I have a garden that conspires against me. It sounds really negative, but every time I turn my back, more plants grow taller than I am because I'm quite short. it's full of fertility, full of abundance. And this Beltane has been very, very busy for me. So I started off, for example, near Fabriano in Italy, at a Beltane, a Druid gathering with one of our seed groups, Kai Gitana, in Fabriano. And that was at the first weekend of Beltane. And that was beautiful, beautiful weather. And then came back. And then the following weekend, I was at Ishnok. Ishnok is the sacred centre of Ireland. And traditionally, that was where the Beltane festivals were held, the fire festivals. So in ancient times, all fires, for example, would have been extinguished in people's households. And the sacred fire at Beltane would be lit. And from that would be lit signal fires. And then people would carry coals back to their own homes again to light the fire that they would maintain for the whole year. Because obviously there were no matches and firelighters. So you had to keep your fire going. And I'm always intrigued by the trust that people had at this time to extinguish their household fires, knowing that they would get the spark again, fed by the Ishnok fire, right? Always, it just blows me away. That trust in nature, trust in tradition, trust in culture, that can happen. And traditionally, there were two fires lit at Beltane, and that's when the cattle would be driven through the fires to have been cleansed, I suppose, more ceremonially than actually physically. And then the ash from those fires would have been scattered, in the fields for fertility. So we, as Druids, well, certainly the OBOD, we light two fires at Beltane. Normally we have one central fire, but that becomes two fires for Beltane, where we look at those fires as representing polarities in our lives. It could be male, female, because in the landscape, it's that union of the male and the female that generates new life. But if you are not into creating new life in that way, it can represent any polarity, light and dark, left and right, whatever the polarities are. And that by walking through those two fires, you're bringing those two together to create a third way of being, to bring some kind of resolution between these two polarities. And it's a very powerful ceremony. So following the Beltane fire at Ishnok, so we had some Druid friends came over from the UK, and then lots of OBOD members in Ireland. A very, very busy day. And then we had our own ceremony here in Kilkenny the next day, which was really, really beautiful. So a really, really busy time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It for me also, I didn't realize that it was Beltane on May 1st, but that day had a kind of accidental synchronicity and significance where it felt like there was maybe a portal opening or some veil between the realms was thinner, and there was this kind of springing to life, this greater sense of possibility or things coming into being. And I could feel the energy on that day, and without even realizing the significance of the seasonal event that was occurring. So it's nice to hear that all of these things were happening, and the significance of fire in this sense, and the trust that you described of the people extinguishing their flames to renew them, like the sense of renewal as well, and creation of the third thing from two things. And I heard almost like an echo of Christianity taking the Trinity from this concept, perhaps. So I don't know if there's any truth in that at all, but it created this image of the Trinity, the three flames, or something like that.
It's really interesting. So there's two flames, but triads are very, very important in Celtic culture. So they particularly in Ireland, because that's what I can speak for. The three Vish war, the great Triskel, is life, is earth, sky, and sea. Those three realms were very, very important as part of the cosmology of Ireland. That connection between those three realms are really important. They maintain the integrity of people and the land, and so much so that if you broke that, so for example, we had this tradition of a gesh, which would be a taboo. It would be an injunction under certain conditions that you had to do something, or that you must not do something. And the consequences of breaking that gesh will be the three Vosh war, the three great deaths. One would be deaths, as that the ground would open up and swallow you, the sky would fall down and crush you, and the seas would rise up and drown you. And that was how important those three realms are in terms of maintaining one's integrity and one's connection with the land and the landscape and the cosmos around one. So it was very easy for, according to the story, when St. Patrick came, he found a shamrock and said, let me explain the Trinity, three gods in one. And of course, people understood, because we had triple deities always. We had triple goddesses, triple gods in many, many manifestations. So it was an easy explanation, an easy tool for him. Now, Christianity happened easily in Ireland. There were no one massacred. And it was a very slow process, because the old ways maintained for a long, long, long time. And there were Christians here before St. Patrick. These are the ones came from the tradition of the Desert Fathers. So when Constantine, the emperor, he was the last pagan emperor, but the first Christian emperor, very cleverly thought, oh, these Christians are growing, why don't I adopt it? And then I can put my bureaucracy on this. And there were certain Christians who weren't having any of that. They fled off into the desert. And it was those Christians who first came to Ireland before the Roman Christians came. So we had this Celtic church, what's called a Celtic church. There were abbeys, there were independent. And Rome really didn't take a hold in Ireland until the Normans came, and the Pope sent various religious orders to destroy the power of the independent abbeys. The abbeys were independent. You had abbesses, you had abbots, you had con hospitae, where you had men and women married, living in monasteries dedicated to God. So, and it was very, very attached to nature and adhering to Brehon laws, which was the legal system at the time, before the penal laws came into play in the 1600s. So I'm not saying it was an idyllic time, but there was much more freedom. So beneath the Christian veneer, you always had that pre-Christian cosmology and worldview. And it's always been there in Ireland, actually, and still is.
Thank you for that. At least three questions sprang up as you were speaking. The first, when you were talking about the earth, the sky, and the sea, and having these things be in balance and be respected, and what happens when they're not, how the sky falls down, the earth swallows you. And it just had me thinking about our current crisis that we're in, where we seem to be exceeding or disrespecting these things and exceeding planetary thresholds, and we're seeing the sky fall and the earth start to swallow us and the seas rise. And it was kind of chilling to think of it in that sense, and how maybe the cosmology that you were describing there and the myths, I wonder, in these traditions, do the origin stories and the myths and the cosmologies also function as sort of prophecies for the future? Is there that connection there?
I don't think it's explicit, but I think you can see that. There is a theory that some of our myths are explanations in story form of what was happening in the sky. So we have Cuchulainn, who's a hero I don't particularly admire, because he's very angry and very aggressive, and he'd have these battle wars. But the descriptions of him during a battle war are similar to descriptions of comets and celestial phenomena that were occurring. So the skies have fallen in the past, forms of meteorites, etc. And we have had some tsunamis and earthquakes, etc. And maybe, I think what you can spot from them are patterns that have happened through history, and reminders that we can't get away with what we're doing, that we have to honor the earth. And it's not so much that the gods are going to punish us, but this is what happens. These are the consequences of our actions if we don't watch what we do.
Hmm.
And it's that we create the punishments, as it were. We create the consequences, rather some greater force outside punishing us, which would you'd have in major the monotheistic religions, that we get punished by some greater power. But actually, we create our own consequences for our actions.
Yeah, I really like that, because to me that is a reflection of the fact that we are nature, right? We are not separate from it. We are extensions of it. We are connected to it, so that what we do sends ripples, and we are in that water. If we are defecating in the water, if we are polluting the water, if we're doing things, that's the water we're swimming in, and there will be consequences. We don't need some external mediator or arbiter to come down and punish us for that. There's a direct relationship. So yeah, I like that. But there was something else I was going to say about that, in terms of the relationship between animism and druidry and the arrival of Christianity, I guess, because there's this sense that I have, and maybe it's correct or incorrect, but that when St. Patrick came, he mythically like drove the snakes out, right? There's this story that he got rid of the snakes, and some people might interpret that as Christianity's slow process of kind of banishing nature and having nature just be a sinful, tempting backdrop for where, we are to play out our time until we go to an eternal afterlife somewhere. Is that there in that story? Is this kind of pathologizing or pushing out of nature away from us something that is visibly felt in that story, or would you say that that's just
Well, it's interesting because that story only came into being in the 12th century, and it is believed to have been borrowed, that motif, from a French story about a saint banishing snakes. So, having read Patrick's writings, he wrote two books, the Confessio and his Epistula. There was nothing magical about him at all. He was quite an insecure man who committed great sin when he was 15 or 16. No idea what that was. His Latin wasn't good. His British colleagues were resentful of the fact that he'd been ordained a bishop and sent to Ireland, given that he wasn't properly educated. So he came from that place. Now, his God was rather biblical rather than Christian, kind of the wrathful, vengeful God. He would talk about God's wrath upon himself, etc. So he didn't go off with all those magical things, banishing snakes, etc. Now, until Murrochú wrote his hagiography, so later on, say 300 years or maybe 400 years after Patrick had been, Rome wanted to have its seat based in Armagh, but there was other cohort of people who wanted the seat of Rome in Kildare because that would have been the Bridget influence. So they needed some branding. So Murrochú wrote his Patrick's hagiography, which gave him power similar to the Druids. So there are stories of where to protect his monks, he turned them into a herd of deer because the enemy were coming. He slayed Crum Dove, the Paschal fire, a fire should have been lit first by the High King at Tara. He lit it at Slane in protest. When he went back to Milcú, his slaver, he said, "I'm giving you a chance to repent and become a Christian." And Milcú said, "No, I don't want any of your ways." And he took out his crozier and he pointed at him, and he burst into bits, he exploded into the air because he was enraged. All of those magical powers that he had in order to strengthen the power of Rome. So all these stories actually were just spin. So reading Patrick's own writings, none of those things happened. It was a much more passive, quieter way. It is believed that the snakes were the Druids. Did he drive them out? There was no mass extinction of Druids like we say with the Romans, as in the military Romans did on Anglesey, where there was that big slaughter. Some of them, Druids, it is believed, escaped to Ireland as well. So it is believed that many Druids saw the writing on the wall and became Christians themselves, but maintained that under a veneer of Christianity, just like voodoo and hoodoo. So the slaves in Haiti and in certain parts of America were not allowed to practice their own traditions. So they became Catholics. And say in Haiti, if you're a Catholic, you're probably voodoo. If you're a Protestant, you hate it. But that behind that veneer of Christian saints and images of the Catholic are the Loa, the voodoo spirits. So there's a veneer of Christianity. So not quite the same in Ireland, but Bridget, the goddess, the triple goddess, became saint. So many of the goddesses became saints, or sacred water, sacred mountains then took on a veneer of Christianity, but holding those traditions underneath. Then we forgot them, as the Catholic Church really took hold after the famine. I think Irish people were very broken, and there was a Cardinal Paul Cullen had just come back from Rome, and he was a great orator, and he inspired a lot of people and a lot of hope after all of the devastation left by the famine, and encouraged people to send their children into religious life, which meant their children got an education, they got fed, and they got status, either become a nun or a priest. And then when we got independence from Britain, the Catholic Church took over as colonizing us our constitution very broadly, a Catholic constitution. So that's when Rome really took a strong hold, um, until the last 20 years with all the church scandals. The church has lost its footing. But for a long time, governments didn't do anything without the permission from the Archbishop of Dublin, etc. So I think we had a lot of freedom that paganism and Christianity just kind of went along side by side, just one underneath. And that's seen in our folklore. That folklore hasn't died. That was always there.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for all of that context. I think that gives a fuller picture of the things that are happening, and the folklore that you described there. I'm also curious about that kind of stuff. What the myths and the stories and the importance of storytelling inside of Druid practice and all of this stuff. How it functions and how it guides, I guess, the modern Druids.
Well, we have a bardic strand, within the order, and that is around, the poets, the storytellers, the history keepers. I think our myths are very, very important. I think they have a relevance today. So I'm a teller, and stories I tell, and I can go, we're having exactly the same thing. When there's people elect a really bad king who has bad motivations, and you go, why did people who are sensible elect someone like that? Well, you know what? The same thing happens today. And you can see things, you see patterns happening. And I was listening to Stephen Fry talk about him using Greek and Roman myths to explain things, because people don't take it personally. Where if you have a conventional story, everybody gets affronted because you've upset one group or other. And I thought that makes so much sense. So telling ancient myths, people will still recognize the patterns, and they'll have resonances today. They'll find those resonances within those ancient stories. And I think they're very, very important. And you can
Yeah.
you can make a point through a myth without coming across as preachy, because I'm telling you the story. This is what happened. Uh, and then people can make their own connections themselves. And Druidry is not about being dogmatic. It's about having conversations, about communicating and saying, this is how things might be, and you make the choice yourself. And storytelling can do that in a very creative way, a very powerful way, and also a very gentle way.
Yes. Yeah, and to me, I feel like as a people, maybe this art, because it is an art, you have to be skillful in order to achieve those ends, to be able to convince someone or persuade someone or show something in a way that's unthreatening or make something serious humorous. It's an art, and it feels like for the most part, I don't know if that's still so alive and well in modern culture. I think we look to like Marvel movies and superheroes for our mythology lately, and it's kind of one dimensional.
Perhaps, yes. And I find, well, even sometimes I find even the written texts, particular characters, particularly women, are very one dimensional. So it's my job to animate them and make them multidimensional, and that can be really, really powerful as well. And finding what I like to do, maybe it's a bit subversive, but is when the story is about the hero, it's like, yeah, but wait a minute, what about all the other really important characters, like the mother, for example, who did X, Y, and Z, who wasn't a slave, or a druidess, for example, and finding their voice and allowing them to speak, because that will not have been written down anywhere. And of course, this is what oral storytelling does: it animates, it amplifies, and it empowers. So the teller is telling a story, but in their own way. And that is really important. And you mentioned earlier, you mentioned animism and, the role of Christianity, etc. Well, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and, I was brought up to believe that only humans have a soul. And of course, animism is the complete opposite, that everything is ensouled. And I'm an animist. I'm also a theist. I weave my way between them. We had a talk a year and a half ago at our winter gathering. On our theme was animism, and one of our speakers, Gordon McLennan, was talking about. I really found this really, really powerful. We are ensouled beings. We consume ensouled beings to feed the unsouled beings that are consuming us. So inside we have a microbiome of all sorts of critters eating us. All right. So we eat ensouled beings to feed those ensouled beings and to feed this ensouled being. So therefore we treat all beings that we consume, be they animal or be they plant, because often there's a thing that you shouldn't eat animals, but you can eat plants. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
we are all ensouled. And the important thing is that if we're eating sustainable animals that have had happy lives, and we eat sustainably grown plants, those and the ensoulment that's there will feed the ensouled beings within us. And it's that in order for a species to survive, it needs to consume another. That is the way of life. That is the cycle of life. We are being consumed. And when we pass, hopefully, we will fertilize and feed the earth in order to produce other food and other animals, etc. And I just found that really reassuring, that notion of ensoulment, that we are all ensouled. And as long as we're mindful of the actions we take and what we consume, I think we can be part of a very rich biome. And
Yes.
that keeps us mindful of that 3V shore, that great spiral of earth, sky, and sea.
Yes. Thank you for that. I strongly, strongly agree with that. It's very dear to my heart, that topic. And it leads us into another part of the conversation that I was interested to dig into, which is we are ensouled, animals are ensouled, plants are ensouled. But in animist practice, generally trees are ensouled,
Yes,
a forest is ensouled, a river, a mountain, and sometimes not just these spaces, but there can be energetic entities that might preside over those spaces. So there are complex, nuanced relationships in these places between ensouled beings that are largely invisible to us
that's
when
right.
we don't or we aren't aware. And what I wanted to pick your brain about a little bit is how do we practically enter into relationship with these beings, right? Like I from a real practical sense, like I struggle with this sometimes, and it's kind of funny when I talk to people about it because they look at me like I'm saying something absurd. But when I'm saying, okay, how do I greet a forest I've never been into before, or even one that I'm returning to a second time? How do I give gratitude and appreciation to a field of flowers? Like, how can people who hear this and go, yeah, that's interesting, I would like to do that? What kind of advice or tips or recommendations might you have for people to start to cultivate this connection to these other ensouled beings around us?
I think, like you would humans, I think, you just don't come into someone's house and sit down and make yourself comfortable. You greet them, you say, "Hi, I'm Danny. Is it okay if I come in? Uh, how are you?" Those kind of things. Making offerings, singing, sharing your breath if you haven't got something in your pocket, well, something that's biodegradable. Um, and also, you said, which is interesting, that at the beginning of May you felt some portal opening or the veil thing, and that is this. Beltane is one of the 3 times in the year when the veil is thinnest between this world and the other world, and that you, just like with people, you can't say, "I want to be your friend and I want you to let me in." You have no right to do that, nor do you have a right to insist that any entity or other being engages with you. And I think it's about, just like we do with humans, uh, you learn to trust somebody, you have to earn trust, you
Hmm.
have to not prove how magical and holy you are, because forget that, because it's not about that. But it's about opening your heart and your mind and your soul and visiting a place and being still and waiting with no expectation of outcome. You are not entitled to anything. And I think in a modern world, so many people walk the earth with an air of entitlement. And you
Yes.
can see that with the takeover of lots of lands at the moment. But also, I am entitled to have a happy life. I am entitled not to be hurt. I am entitled for X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. No, you're not. None of us are. I mean, we do have entitlements and we do have privileges. I'm not denying that, but we have no entitlement to them. And it's
Hmm.
like going into a forest or a sacred space and being there and being open to the fact you may get some engagement or you may not, but that's not the point. The point is, how still are you in that sense? How open are you? What are you offering rather than what are you getting? And it may be, how do you express gratitude? You sing it, you talk it, you cry it, maybe, you breathe it, and you wait. It may happen or it may never happen, but that's not the point. The point is what are you giving? What are you offering to that place?
Hmm. I sorry. Go.
And
Go ahead.
I just to quote your late JFK, not ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And it's about not what the forest will give you, it's what can you give to the forest. And your breath is really important because remember, we exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with the trees. And that's one of the easiest things you can do is share your breath. Doing it, I mean, you're breathing anyway, but mindfully sharing your breath
Hmm.
and being grateful for the oxygen the trees are giving you and offering your carbon dioxide back and knowing that, there's that beautiful co-creation between you and the forest. And that in itself can be enough. And that actual experience of I'm breathing with the trees are breathing with me. That in itself can be really, really profound. Rather than I saw three fairies jump out of a tree and they come out and spoke to me. That kind of stuff. That may happen, but it may not. Don't be expecting anything. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That's beautiful poetic imagery that resonates with me. I feel like I've felt those types of things in the forest before. If there's enough stillness inside of me, or if I've happened to eat a psychedelic mushroom or something like this, you could feel this energy, this quality. But it raises a deeper question to me. So those are things that we can do to speak to nature, to these energies and these spirits. Where I struggle is the listening part. How do you listen to something that doesn't speak to us in words? And that's the tricky part where I can sing a song, I can go with an intention, I could leave some offering, but I never quite know if I'm welcome in the space. I don't have clarity on necessarily what the answer is. I guess if it was a resounding no or something like that, if a boulder came rushing at me or a gust of wind knocked me down or something like this happened, then I could understand. Okay, I shouldn't enter. But when there's not a clear answer, it's tricky to decipher and understand what the message is back to me.
well, you get that with people. When you feel welcome, when you don't, and nobody has to say anything to you. And I think it's about listening and being still. And it's about that incredible stillness as you breathe with the forest or wherever you are. And I think it's that stillness that training yourself to be still and to listen. And it's listening with your whole body and your mind and your soul, not just with your ears. You may trip and fall. That may not be a sign that you're not welcome. It may be a sign. Look down here. There's something here, and you haven't seen it, and so we have to trip you for you to see it. Or it may say, "Stop, sit still at this moment," or take a break. It can mean anything, but I think it's about training yourself to listen and not be grandiose. There's always a thing is this my imagination? Am I creating this in my head because this is what I want? And it's good to interrogate that. And if it is your imagination, so be it. As long as you're not grandiose about it, keep it to yourself. Just work with that
Hmm.
and test it in its own time. I think that's the only advice I can give because
Okay.
how do we ever know anything? But it's again about giving time and it's about sitting with that stillness. or walking with the stillness, as it were, of the forest.
Hmm.
And I think if the forest doesn't want you, you get a resounding no. And it's about listening to it. There's a forest I go to regularly, and I remember I have to drive. It's a 5-minute drive away. And I got out of my car and I began to walk along the path, and I got a feeling, turn back. Now, I didn't get the sense wasn't that the forest didn't want me. A sense is it's not safe. I listened to it and I went back, and I don't know if there was anything dangerous or not. I rarely get that because I can walk there on my own at night in the dark, and it's never a problem. But so I got that sense. And another time I was walking and I could sense this fear. And then I realized it wasn't mine. It was fear of small animals from predators. And it was just kind of, oh, what am I afraid of? Is there a threat? And then I began to, no, this isn't man. I'm just picking it up from the fear from smaller animals because there's a predator nearby. So it could have been a mouse and a fox. I have no idea. That kind of thing. And that comes with time and with practice. Because I know when I started, you know, as a druid, and even before that, going to various workshops, and we'd have to sit still and become aware of our body. And I thought, what the hell is this about? What what does sitting still mean? What does being aware of my body and doing a body scan and focusing on my breath? I can't stand it. It's boring. I want to be out walking. Get me to do a walking meditation. I'll walk a labyrinth. But this sitting still, I just could not get it. And then because I'm a compliant participant, I'll do what I'm told and I'll sit still. And and then one day it happened. Duh, I got it. I don't remember what day it was, but it's like, oh, now I get it after all this time. So it just happened, but I couldn't plan it. And it's that, and it's just do it anyway and see what happens. But do
Hmm.
not have an investment in the outcome. The outcome is not important. It's the actual process. It's the actual being in that moment.
Hmm. Thank you for that. A few thoughts came to me. One, that this is a sort of learning a new language. You don't just snap your fingers and you can speak German.
That's
It will
right.
take time and practice. You will look foolish. You will make mistakes. You'll misinterpret things. And just one day, you'll know, and it'll be there. So I like that you helped me see it this way, where it's continue to build relationality and try to speak, and you will and train yourself to it. You will begin to learn and become fluent in the language. So that's one part. And there was a second part, but it has just so the second part is that there is an emergent quality to it. It's something that isn't. It's almost trans-rational. The rational mind cannot access it. It, like you said, requires the entire body, your energy, your soul, your maybe even connection to past and future ancestors. And because I would consider ancestors not just human, but as you mentioned before, all of the ensouled animals and plants and elements. Even, like, to me, fire and water are maybe two of our most important ancestors. And I wonder what you think about that, actually, from your perspective, because it's just something that's come to me. But I feel that without them, we couldn't be.
Absolutely, we are. We contain all the elements within us. I have a story. I lived in Lesotho, which is in southern Africa, a little mountain kingdom surrounded by South Africa. And it's the Basotho are the people, but their ancestors are a mix of hunter gatherers, cannibals, Sotho speakers, refugees from Zulus, slash and burn policies. And they gathered in Lesotho. And there is Tababusi, the Mountain of the Night, where King Moshoeshoe the First, he was I would say, the father of the Basotho. He had his fortress at the top. He would come down during the night to let people graze the cattle, and then it would be back up during the day so the enemies couldn't get them. Now, some cannibals came, people who were cannibals came looking for sanctuary, and the people said to him, we cannot allow them into our tribe because they're cannibals. And he said, we will, because they contain within them the spirits of our ancestors. And I knew a person whose surname meant cannibal. I can't remember what it was, though. She told me this, and I thought, wow, what a profound story that, I mean, to our modern minds, that's quite horrific. That notion that we contain the spirits of our ancestors, or of animals or beings, and certainly we do that with the elements. We have them within us. We are of the earth. We have fire. We have heat. We have water. We breathe. All of those, without which we cannot survive. And we have sparks. We have sparks of emotion, sparks of ideas. We have fiery metaphors within our beings all the time. And we have emotions that flow, and we have inspiration. And then we're grounded, and we're nurtured, and we're held. So the elements are incredibly important within our beings.
Hmm. Yeah, and another thought just came to me about the time that you're sharing, or the stories you're sharing about your time in Africa. In my perspective, you stand at a unique kind of crossroads where you have access to the cosmologies of ancient pagan cosmologies, and also perhaps these African cosmologies. Do you find overlap in them? Are there a lot of commonality? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've been to Peru, and you're looking at their cosmology, very, very similar. What I would say, so indigenous cultures and pre-Christian culture here, they're very similar, and the same with anywhere indigenous cultures. The colors and the textures are different, but the principles and the values are the same around honoring the four quarters, earth, sky, sea, the land, the animism that's everywhere. Very, very similar. I would just say it's a bit like food. The spices are different, but it's still food. It still nurtures us. And that's what makes it really, really interesting. We can have meals together. We can have a potluck supper with food from different cultures, and it still feeds us. And I think it's the same, where indigenous cultures can meet and stand together and recognize what the other is doing, even though it looks a bit different. But it's like, yes. I'd worked with an American woman from the Cree tradition, and I loved all of that. I thought it was brilliant. And I'd done sweat lodges here in Ireland, and then I have a very close friend from Tanzania who's a healer. So I've had, initiations there, all wonderful, but they weren't from my landscape. And this is how, luckily, I found Druidry. And I thought, oh, they are so, so similar and yet different, but we understand each other. And I love that. So it's easy to go to any indigenous culture and you go, yeah, I get this, 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 and this. Or I have a sympathy with, or I have a resonance with it. And likewise, if they come to Ireland and come to one of our ceremonies. And yet we don't know how our ancient ancestors, we don't know exactly what the ceremonies were, but we can glean from the texts. And I've also learned a lot about it from the Irish language. There are clues in that as to how people thought and how people were, which I find quite magical.
That raises another question for me, which is a thing I've wondered at times is how important, or maybe important isn't the right word, is it the case that the words of these texts, or the things you say in ceremony or ritual, matter as much or more than the intention that you have in the ceremony? I don't know if what I'm saying is clear enough.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
I think so. I've been taught that if you're going to do a spell, that words are critical and crucial, as well as the intention. And if you leave out a detail in the words, then the spell will go wrong. But I don't do spells, so that's not my thing. So I think intention is really, really important. I was at a conference years ago with my husband, and it was about healing intention. And they'd done some research on, having a healer wired up with a PET scan and a Healy at a distance wired up. And they were looking at the brains. But what happened was, so the healer is about to send the healing, hasn't done it yet, but the centers in the Healy's brain lit up. So the healing happened with the intention. And I think intention is everything. So your words, you mightn't get the word right, or you might forget a particular wording. That's not important. I think it's crucial to remember that, because if it's always words, then it becomes very performative.
Yes. Yeah, thank you a lot for that, because another thing, I just read this incredible book. I keep talking about it. I can't shut up about it. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Yes.
And she talks so much about reciprocity and gratitude, and she gives some examples of the Thanksgiving address that Indigenous people
Yeah.
use, and it's very beautiful to read it, and maybe perhaps even to memorize it. But it sparked this question where I said, is memorizing something like this and doing it every day better or worse, as effective as coming up with something that is in my own language, in my own tradition, in my own energy? So what you're saying here sounds like, yeah, it's probably better to cultivate your own thing instead of just performing some rote words that you've
Well,
memorized.
having said that, I mean, I say prayers. I say a Druid prayer. I've translated them into Irish. There's various prayers I say every day that I have memorized. And by having done that, I've taken them in within myself.
Hmm.
And I may not always get those words right, even though I have memorized, but that's not important. It's the intention, because I know, and my higher self knows the intention behind the prayer. That's what this is about. So it's both. It's kicking yourself because you got the word wrong, is where I was thinking, no, now you're being performative. And then if it's a private thing, I don't think it matters. Sometimes if we're in a ceremony with others and we get the words wrong, we get into, oh God, that was my mistake and I shouldn't have. And no, I did that wrong, yada, yada, yada. And then it becomes all about yourself and your ego. So, for example, I'm a wedding celebrant. I'm a legal solemnizer of pagan weddings. And sometimes we'll have done a rehearsal in a different place to where the ceremony is. And I start off in the wrong direction. I've missed my direction. And I'm going, oh my God, I've made a mistake. Aha, let's go back. And then I start and I correct it and I go on with it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful lesson. Thank you for sharing that. It's that's important, I think, to know. And also what you're saying, I really like that it's both, that it isn't this binary, this or that type of thing. It's a blurry in between.
Both
And
and yeah.
yes, and so I really like this, because it seems the deeper I get into these practices, the more I learn about them, the more things seem porous, blurry, that the boundaries don't begin and end at our skin, that, there's things are mixing. Like the theme seems to be participation and interaction. Everything is just interacting with everything and bleeding and spilling and mixing. And that's this orgiastic nature of, I guess, life energy. It wants to connect and dance and sing and do these kind of things, and maybe play. Maybe play is the thing at the heart of that.
Absolutely. It's um, stand firmly on the ground, but hold your beliefs lightly. It's don't take yourself too seriously. And being able to laugh at yourself. Humor is really, really important. And we combine reverence and mirth together. Take the rod out, just chill and be. Have you ever, watched a bee, you know, kick itself because it went to the wrong flower or went back to the same flower twice? No. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. Uh, Birds don't give themselves a hard time for singing out of key. And birds they're not born as good singers. They practice,
Hmm.
which I found really interesting. If you listen to baby birds, they're just screeching,
Screeching. Yeah.
and they learn how to sing, and then they get better with practice. They
It's
also sing
funny,
dialects, by the way.
the bird singing dialects.
Yeah,
I think I've heard something about this before, that actually through these bird dialects you can go and trace back certain human sounds even. Is this accurate?
I've heard something like that too. I mean, I this is what I've heard, and I'm always fascinated by things like this.
Hmm. And it's, you said something, I'm happy you spoke about bees, because I remember the last time we spoke you said that you keep bees. And about a week ago, I think, maybe even to the day, I had the experience of harvesting honey, because I spend a lot of time on farms volunteering, and I'm on one now, and they keep bees. And I never understood what happens, like how the honey gets from the hive into the jar. and it was such a
Yeah.
fantastic, mesmerizing, insane experience. So I'm sure you know this experience, but I've seeing it for the first time. It was wondrous. I was just going, wow, we take these little things out and you open them like, this packaging, and you put them in a thing and whirl it up and spin it around, and it throws the honey out of the little shapes, and the whole air is perfumed with honey. It was so beautiful. I wanted to actually mention it to you and share that, wow, this, you probably know this experience, and it was so special to have it for the first time. So yeah, thank you for bringing up bees.
Well, I didn't get to harvest honey last year. I don't harvest much. I tend to host them rather than keep them. But both my hives were decimated by wasps. It's the third time it's happened, in the 15 years I've had bees. So I've had a swarm, I think. I leave them alone. So and now I have a top bar hive, which you had frames and you put it into a extractor and you do this. So now what I have to do, if I take a comb, it's a natural comb, I just put it in a muslin bag and hang it up and let it drip. It's a really long, cumbersome way. But the
Mm.
perfume from the honey, but also the wax, is just beautiful, and the propolis is really lovely. I mean, it's amazing what bees do and how important they are. And when you think of decimation with the pesticides and all that, it's just heartbreaking how much we're damning. And also the bee slavery, taking bees, following the flowering plants, across, you say the almond ones and things like that. And that's really, really, bees get stressed. That's really, really, it's really, really sad that they're treated like that.
Can you speak a little bit more about the bee slavery thing, and because I'm not familiar with this?
I know it happens in the US.
Uh huh.
So what they do is in order to pollinate the almond flowers, so they follow, as obviously, the weather patterns change as you go across the US. So the almond trees are in flower at different times. So they follow the trees when they're in flower. So they have the bees on trucks and then they take them
Mm.
to almond plantations and they pollinate them and then they move on and they take them across the states.
Yeah, I didn't even. That's so fascinating. I'm sure there's documentaries or studies or things
Maybe they've
about
stopped
this.
doing that. It's hardly likely that they have, but it's about that manipulation of
Mm.
agriculture or whatever it is, and that's that awful thing that we end up with, the serious consequences. And it's not the big God that's punishing us, but if you stress and distress uh, various species of animal or whatever, there's going to be a knockback. Just like when we're stressed and distressed, we act out.
Mm.
Um, and then what happens is invasive species come from someplace else, and all this manipulation, it causes problems. We don't know. We think we do, but we don't know. And that's the sad thing. The arrogance of it, the hubris of it is really sad. Anyway.
Yeah. This idea that the bees are ours to use. They're a tool to pollinate that we can just transport around the country and make almonds with it. Yeah, it's a little bit maddening and infuriating to think about.
And there's a book called the books on bees, but who speaks for the bees? So that's the book. It talks about various. I mean, there's honeybees and there's lots of bees, but you have solitary bees are highly intelligent. They come out of their hole and they fly around and they look at the landmarks, so they know how to come back to the spot. This, it's incredible how intelligent they are.
Yeah, yeah, they are. I think they have something to teach us if we're willing to, as we were speaking about before, enter into dialogue with them and gain some fluency in what the wisdom of the bees
And they're all
are.
of service. Everything is of service. So the queen, I mean, people you know, describe a woman as a queen bee in a derogatory term. But it's like, no, a queen bee is of service. She is fed, but she is constantly producing young, laying eggs. Dedicates her life to service. And then you have the worker bees, and they last about 6 weeks, I think, and they are in service. There's the foragers, then there's the carers who feed either feeding the queen or they're feeding the larvae, feeding them whatever they need so that they can then hatch and become either worker bees or foragers, or worker bees and foragers the same, but or drones. The drones are they're the males. They tend not to do much, except they mate. Um, the queen once in her life flies up into this corridor, and then the drones are up there waiting to mate with her. But the drone, as soon as he does, he dies because that's the end of him. But he's had a chance to mate with the queen, and she mates with many, 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 and then comes back down and never leaves again. And there's still drones hanging around. I don't know what they do really, and you'll see them in autumn. The females kicking them out now. It's like you're going to be eating our honey, so you don't produce any good. Maybe they cool the hive in the summer. Um, so
Yeah, this topic, because I know we're coming up on time soon, which is sad for me, but you've inspired a topic that I wanted to cover that I forgot or didn't find a way into until now, which is this idea of being in service and how this is an important aspect of Druidry and animism in general. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and maybe have some practical ways that people can be in service, maybe especially for those who don't have a garden or something.
being of service is what gives us meaning. It can manifest in any way. So it can be you being a good neighbor, doing the shopping for your neighbor. It can be service to your family, service to your work colleagues. It's what does it give? Doing something for another with no expectation of return is what service is. And taking pleasure from that and giving meaning. That can be anything. But random acts of kindness, smiling at somebody, greeting somebody, you have no idea of how powerful a smile is or a greeting, that can make somebody's day. So it's very, very simple. It doesn't have to be uh, as a druid or a priest or a nurse or a doctor. It can be, but it can be as a good friend, a good family member. What is it that gives you meaning? And we all need to find that for ourselves. I think generally it's about doing something for another person. That's how simple it is. Or
Mm.
you go to the park, you haven't got a garden of your own, and just pick up litter. And, it's a private thing. Nobody need to know about it. It's those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, so that those good deeds aren't performative, like we were talking about
That's
before.
right.
Yeah.
Signing petitions, donating to causes, whatever it is. Not salving your conscience. I don't mean that, but actually, and doing things privately.
Yeah, there was just an initiative here in Poland that my partner and I were involved in. We played a small part, which successfully resulted in the Odra River in Poland being recognized. It has legal personhood now, so
Oh,
it
well
can be,
done.
yeah, it could be more protected, and it's really great. Like that, people, there were enough people. They needed something like very. There's a high threshold, and the so that it happened is really incredible and impressive. And I think it's the first in Europe to have this recognition. So it's a big
Oh,
thing.
well done. What an achievement. And that's impressive. Well done. Things like that, you know.
Sorry, you were about to say
Which is
something.
next door. There's a graveyard next to me, and so local people have decided we're going to clean the graveyard. So they meet every Saturday. I haven't been able to imagine I'm next door, but that's of service. It's that kind of people. Let's go and pick up litter. Let's have a street party, in the summer, or do small things, a fundraiser for something, clear people's snow from their driveway, whatever it is, or yeah, simple. Anyway, well done on the river. That's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we played a small part, but we played a part. So it was a big collective group action that I'm happy that there were so many people who are interested in this because it gives some hope in a time where, for me, at least looking at the things that are happening in the States and other places in the world, in Gaza, and there's just so much to be fearful and despairing about, that this was a little glimmer of something nice that happened.
Absolutely. And you can't do it on your own. It must be in solidarity with others
Yes.
and community. We cannot stand up on our own. And I think that sense of isolation, I'm the only one here. And I think that's why community is really, really important. I mean, a community of two, a community of three, it'll start with that. But solidarity and doing things in solidarity is very, very important.
Yes. Yeah. yeah, that's another topic I would love to to speak even more about. But I know we don't have the time to do that. So I
Another
guess
time.
to
Yeah.
yeah. So to end, I would just give you the floor and see if there's anything that you would like to promote or talk about. Maybe you have something coming up that you'd like to share, or you want to let people know where they could find you. I just want to give you the floor for that.
I'm not good at the self promotion bit. I just Bealtaine blessings to you. I'm going to a storytelling festival in the East Anglian Storytelling Festival this weekend. I'm going as a punter and then heading to Glastonbury afterwards for our summer gathering. So druidry.org is our website for the order, and you can find out anything about OBOD there and about Druidry. We have a distance learning course and lots of information about Druidry. We have an introductory pack if people wanted to get a flavour of what Druidry might be like. So
Hmm.
just wishing you all abundance. I'm just looking at lots of green and it's raining at the moment. I'm not complaining. If it doesn't rain for 2 weeks, we call that a drought. So I'm hoping this is a prediction, or they say a wet and windy May fills the barns with fodder and hay. So our first 2 weeks were dry, and now these are wet. So maybe that is a portent of a nicer summer because we get weather obsessed here in Ireland. So
Hmm.
wishing you all lots of green and abundance.
Thank you for passing through, Emer, and looking forward to talking soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Danny.
Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener. Thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.